She didn't say it out loud. She never does. But she thought it. The moment he walked in. No rush, no performance, just presence. She leaned over to her friend and whispered something. Her friend smiled and nodded slowly. You want to know what she said? Stay with me. Because what women confess, behind closed doors, in quiet conversations, in the honest hours after midnight, about men over 50, it will change the way you see yourself. Not who you were, who you've become. And before we go further, if no one's ever told you the truth about this, if you've spent years feeling invisible, overlooked, or like your best days were behind you, this channel exists for one reason. Hit subscribe. Because what we talk about here doesn't come from self-help books or motivational speakers. It comes from something older, something quieter, something real. Now let's begin. There's a conversation happening that most men over 50 never get to hear. It happens in coffee shops, in whispered phone calls between close friends, in the honest corners of a woman's mind when no one is performing, no one is trying to impress, and the masks come down. And in that conversation, the name that keeps coming up isn't the young guy with the gym selfies and the loud opinions. It's the man who walked in and said nothing for a full minute because he was just thinking. It's the man who disagreed, calmly, without apology, without needing her to validate him. It's the man who'd already been through something. Women don't always say this publicly. The culture doesn't always make space for it. But privately, there is a specific kind of man that women find themselves drawn to in a way they can't always explain. And more often than not, that man has lived past 50. Not because of what he looks like, because of what he no longer needs. Here's the first thing women confess, though they rarely frame it this way. They are exhausted by men who need to be managed, not in the way they'll say it outright, but in the way they feel it. That slow, quiet drain of being with someone who needs constant reassurance, who crumbles at criticism, who performs confidence but panics beneath the surface. A woman in her 40s once described it to a close friend like this, not as a complaint, but as a realization. She said she'd spent years thinking she wanted someone young, exciting, unpredictable. And then she sat across from a man who was 53 years old. He'd been through a divorce, raised a son on his own for 2 years, built a business from scratch and lost it. Then built it again, smaller this time, but steadier. And she said, he didn't need anything from me. Not my approval, not my admiration, not my reassurance. He just sat there, present, solid, like a tree that had already survived every storm it was going to face. And she said, I didn't realize how tired I was until I felt what calm actually felt like. That's not a romantic cliché. That's a woman describing what it feels like to sit across from a man who has earned his stillness. And here's the quiet truth that most men over 50 never hear. That stillness, that groundedness, that unshakable quality that comes not from arrogance, but from experience. Women notice it before he says a single word. The second confession is harder for women to say, but it's the one they mean most deeply. They want a man who has a relationship with his own pain, not a man who performs toughness, not a man who pretends he's never been broken, but a man who went through the fire, the loss, the failure, the betrayal, the long nights, and came out the other side without becoming bitter, without becoming cold, without closing the door on his own humanity. There's a difference between a man who suppresses pain and a man who has processed it. Women feel that difference. They feel it in how he listens, in whether he flinches when she says something real, in whether he gets defensive or whether he gets curious. A man who has never been broken, or worse, a man who has been broken and never acknowledged it, carries that wound into every room he enters. It shows up as control, as dismissiveness, as the inability to sit in silence without reaching for his phone or changing the subject. But a man who has walked through his own grief, who has looked at his failures without running from them, who has made peace with the version of himself he can't undo. That man has a quality women can feel from across the room. It is not weakness. It is the most specific kind of strength. And it tends to arrive, not in a man's 20s, not even in his 30s. It tends to arrive somewhere around 50 if he's done the work. The third thing women confess, and this one surprises people, is about attention. Not the performance of attention. Not the nodding and the and the phone face down gesture. Real attention. The kind that's becoming rare enough that when a woman encounters it, she remembers it for years. A younger man, more often than not, is half present. He's thinking about how he's coming across. He's measuring her reaction. He's running a quiet calculation in the background. Am I winning this conversation? Am I impressing her? Does she like me? But a man who has lived long enough, who has had enough conversations, who has lost enough people and loved enough people to understand that this moment is the whole point. That man listens differently. He looks at her, not through her, not at her, like she's a puzzle to be solved or an audience to be won. He listens like her words actually matter to him. And for a woman who has spent years being half heard, that's not just attractive, that's almost unbearable in the best way. Now here's something no one talks about, and it sits at the heart of why women are quietly drawn to men in this season of life. Men over 50 have usually stopped lying, not just to others, to themselves. There's a kind of lie that younger men tell without knowing they're telling it. The lie of the curated self, the version they present to the world that's slightly braver, slightly more certain, slightly more in control than the reality. It's not malicious, it's just survival. Culture teaches men to perform strength so early and so completely that by their 30s, many of them can no longer locate the difference between who they are and who they're pretending to be. But somewhere in the 50s, something often shifts. Maybe it's a health scare. Maybe it's a relationship that ended. Maybe it's the death of a parent, or a quiet morning when a man sits with his coffee and realizes, I don't know how much time I have left, and I'm done spending it on performances. That man becomes something rare. He becomes specific. He knows what he likes, and he'll tell you without apology. He knows his limits, and he doesn't pretend otherwise. He knows his values, not the ones he inherited or adopted to fit in, but the ones he fought for, tested against real life, and chose to keep. Women feel the absence of performance the way you feel the absence of noise, as a relief so complete it almost feels like silence. There's a confession that comes up in different forms across the conversations women have with each other, and it usually comes out something like this. He doesn't make me feel like I need to take care of him. This is bigger than it sounds. Because for a long time, longer than most men realize, many women have been quietly doing the emotional labor in their relationships, tracking moods, managing comfort, making sure everyone is okay, being the one who holds things together when things start to tremble. And they do it because they love, because they're capable, because the alternative, saying I'm tired, can you carry this for a while, often leads to a look of confusion or a conversation that requires even more labor to resolve. But a man who is grounded in himself, a man who has processed his own wounds, a man who doesn't arrive at the relationship empty and expecting to be filled. That man changes the entire dynamic. She can exhale. She can be cared for instead of always being the one who cares. She can be the one who receives for a while. And that specific relief, that specific safety, is what women are confessing when they talk about men over 50. Not his looks, not his money, not his status, his steadiness. Let me say something directly now, because this matters. If you're a man in your 50s or 60s or beyond, and you've been walking around believing that your best years are behind you, I want you to understand what you've actually built. You've built scar tissue that became wisdom. You've built patience through situations that would have destroyed your younger self. You've built the ability to be still in an age that is louder than any age that has ever existed. And that stillness is its own form of power. You are not invisible. You are not irrelevant. You are not competing with younger men and losing. You are in a category they cannot reach yet, not because you're better, but because you've been somewhere they haven't. And the women who have lived long enough to recognize that, to know the difference between performance and presence, between charm and character, between excitement and peace, they see you. They just don't always say it out loud, because the most honest confessions never get said in public. They get said quietly, in the kind of honesty that only comes after everything performative falls away. And what they say, when they're being honest, is this: a man who has lived fully, who has been broken and rebuilt, who carries his years with dignity instead of apology. There is nothing quite like that. And I don't think I understood what I was looking for until I finally found it. That's what this is about. Not chasing something, not performing something, being something. The thing you've spent 50 years quietly becoming. The most attractive version of you isn't in the past. It's in the stillness you've earned. It's in the calm that younger men are still years away from finding. It's in the room you walk into without needing anything from it. And she notices. She always notices. She just doesn't always say it out loud.